Hey everyone, Tin Man here. Today I want to talk about another fundamental concept of Artifact called ancient pressure. This is an analogous concept to the clock or racing in Magic or Hearthstone. To win a game of Artifact, you need to do one of two things. You need to either destroy two different towers in two different lanes, or destroy one tower plus the 80 health ancient behind it. Ancient pressure is a measure of how fast that ancient is going down if you abandon that lane. Typically, since there are three lanes you need to fight on, you don't really have resources to fully contest all three lanes. So at some point in a normal game, you'll be giving up on one of those three lanes. And in order to make that decision of which lane to give up and when, you have to assess your opponent's ancient pressure in that lane. Basically, how fast will they destroy that ancient? If you give up a lane where there's just a normal mix of a couple of heroes plus maybe a couple of creeps, that's pretty low ancient pressure, and it's fairly safe to abandon that. That lane isn't going to destroy your ancient for 5 or 6 more turns, which is plenty of time for you to win the other two lanes. Plus, also, if a lot of their power is tied up in their heroes, they're going to want to get those heroes out of the lane to redeploy them to the first two lanes, using things like Blink Dagger or Town Portal Scroll. So those low ancient pressure lanes can generally be ignored. But higher ancient pressure lanes that tend to have cards like Mist of Avernus, maybe Disciple of Nevermore, Red Mist Pillager, or Prey on the Weak to create a lot of creeps, are hitting your tower for a whole lot of damage, and they put your ancient on a 2 or 3 turn clock. Whenever a lane has high ancient pressure, it forces the person who gave up that lane to become the aggressor in the other two lanes. And that can be capitalized on by the person who has the ancient pressure because they just now need to stall those other two lanes. They don't need to actively win them because they're going to kill the ancient in pretty short order. So to illustrate these concepts, I have a replay of one of my recent draft games, and let's go over that. And I think it illustrates some of these concepts well. But if you want to check out even a more in-depth discussion of these, make sure you check out the article in the description down below. So this is a typical draft game. I have a red-blue deck with 2 Beastmasters and a Luna on the flop. My opponent has a Magnus and 2 Phantom Assassins. So we look at this initial flop, and it's pretty even. We're trading creeps back and forth. No one seems to have much of an advantage. We have a Bronze Legionnaire to play. We're probably going to want to play that on turn 1, and it makes sense to go into lane 1, since in lane 2 it has to go in front of Phantom Assassin and just dies right away. I consider putting it on the right initially, maybe hoping it curves into Magnus, but then I remember that Magnus has his signature card, which gives him cleave, or gives any hero cleave, and I don't want that that Bronze Legionnaire to get cleaved down at some point. Opponent does something similar with an Assassin's Apprentice to just add some damage to the lane, and then lane 3 we just pass back and forth. I briefly consider Ventriloquy, which can make my opponent's unit taunt so that I can curve the Luna to attack her, but it doesn't actually create a favorable trade, so I hold off for now. And of course there's no buying on the first turn here. So this is an interesting deploy phase, and I want to talk about it real briefly. We see that we have 2 creeps deploying in the left lane, whereas our opponent has 1 in the left, 1 in mid, and then they have a green hero to deploy, whereas we have a blue hero. Their green hero generally doesn't want to go in the same lane as their other green hero, because then they can only cast green spells out of one lane, whereas if they have multiple green spells, maybe they want to put this in lane 2 or 3. For a similar concept, we don't want to put Jamoy in lane 3. Not only because he'll just definitely die to Phantom Assassin, but also we can't cast our blue spells like Aghanim Sanctum that's in our hand. So we're probably going to want to put Jamoy in lane 1 or 2. Since we have 2 creeps spawning in lane 1, I see an opportunity to really take advantage and kind of snowball lane 1 out of control. And we might force our opponent to give up on it, since we do have that advantage. And that's always advantageous, because having advantage in lane 1 is much more important than having advantage in lane 3, because lane 1 happens first, simply put. You can cast cards from lane 1 into lanes 2 and 3, and they'll happen kind of that round. Whereas if you're casting out of lane 3 back into lane 1 or 2, they won't really happen until next round. So we see here that we top deck the Red Mist Pillager, which is one of those cards on that list that I said creates a lot of ancient pressure. So immediately I'm starting to see this game plan take shape. Our opponent is probably going to be giving up lane 1, and we have a card that will generate a lot of ancient pressure in lane 1 as well. So I recognize this and think, okay, we need to kind of maximize our utility on lane 1 so that we can guarantee have that fast ancient pressure. Meanwhile, we're just going to stall lanes 2 and 3. We generally want to give up a lane where our opponent has committed 2 heroes to it. So lane 3 is kind of looking like that lane that we're going to abandon, which is also the advantageous lane to abandon. So we start with the Aghanim Sanctum on lane 1, which seems like an overcommitment because, well, we might already win this lane. But like I said, we want to just ensure that we really hammer home that we are here to win this lane. Opponent plays their cleave spell, so that's why we correctly put the Bronze Legionnaire on the left, and we attack on in. Now lane 2 is going pretty even. We're going to trade some stuff off, play the Stonehall Elite, which will get advantage over the Assassin's Apprentice, and then we just go to combat. Meanwhile, on lane 3, our opponent plays Tyler State Censor. Okay, so they're contesting lane 2. Good thing we had initiative to play that first before the Tyler State Censor came down. So over here on lane 3, we don't really have much to play. We could cast Better Late Than Never in this lane and just have it kind of trade with the Phantom Assassin, but due to the regeneration off of Enchantress, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't kill off the Phantom Assassin, it doesn't stall much damage. I mean, it's only 6. That's not really a ton in the grand scheme of things. So I actually think we're going to put the Better Late Than Never on lane 2. That's the lane that we need to stall, remember, because we're trying to get Ancient Pressure on lane 1, while our opponent doesn't really have Ancient Pressure in lane 3. So we stall with Better Late Than Never on lane 2. Our opponent commits an extra unit to this lane, which further reinforces our decision to just completely cut bait and get rid of this lane. We're going to forget about it, let them strand their units, possibly strand their heroes in this lane, and they're really only dealing, 9 or 12 damage a turn, something in that range, which is not really enough to force an Ancient kill with any degree of speed, since we're going to have random creep spawn in there that'll just randomly block the Satyr Duelist or something else. We pick up a Fountain Flask to heal up the Jamoy in lane 1, which will keep him alive and keep the pressure going. And now our game plan is pretty simple. Stall lane 2. Nothing else. We're going to play Red Mist Pillager on 1, and then stall lane 2 and give up lane 3, because we have Ancient Pressure and our opponent doesn't. So now the curves work out where we're just going to trade with the Magnus, but we have a Red Mist Pillager to clean things up. The Fountain Flask will heal up Jamoy, and we'll give our opponent an opportunity to spend their mana, which they do. They play Salamani's Favor on lane 2, which they now recognize is the important lane because they have given up lane 1, and we have given up lane 3, so they think it's going to be a fight over lane 2. But they don't realize that we have Red Mist Pillager, which is going to snowball lane 1 out of control way faster than they can ever take lane 2. So here on this turn is pretty much just going to be traded back and forth. We had considered casting Clear the deck, but our hero was Coup de Grâce. So now we have that interesting play with Ventriloquy, where we can taunt. We can force one of their heroes to taunt in order to trade off with it. Remember, we're not really trying to win this lane, just trying to stall. So we'll force Phantom Assassin to taunt. We don't have any inclination to ever try to cast a Marrowfell Brawler in this lane, right? So we're not trying to cast that next turn because we don't have a red hero here. So we don't really need that extra 1 mana from the Tyler State Censor to trade that off. So I'd rather just kill the hero and get our gold and prevent damage next turn, because this Tyler State Censor is really just a 2/6. They play Verdant Refuge further, assuming that that's the lane to fight over, and we're just gonna. We were considering casting Arcane Assault to retake initiative, but it doesn't really matter because they gave us initiative anyway. So now if you see over here on lane 1, their tower has 19 health, and we're dealing 20 damage, which is important because if you let the tower survive at just a couple of health, say 1 or 2 health, basically your next combat step is wasted, right? Because you're going to kill it and the damage doesn't carry over. So you essentially stall yourself out by a turn of Ancient Pressure. It takes an extra turn to kill the Ancient if you have to spend an extra turn killing the first tower. Our opponent does get a lucky creep in here, and we have some very unlucky arrows where 2 of our attackers curve into it. So now we don't have Fatal on this tower at all. But even though we've won this lane and they've basically given it up, we're still going to commit more resources to it because we need to kill the tower this turn. And we see that we can do that by using Marrowfell Brawler plus the Beastmaster active, just as is. We can add 9 damage that way. But there's actually a better way. We can use the battlefield control to change the Red Mist Pillager to attack them, which generates another Red Mist, which generates another, more Ancient Pressure, which is what this whole video and this whole game really is all about. Not every game devolves into Ancient Pressure, but this game certainly did. So we bring Red Mist back to attack the opposing tower, and since our opponent has no heroes in this lane, they can't cast any cards. And we're actually just we can actually just cast the Marrowfell Brawler with the Aghanim Sanctum, and then Blink Dagger one of the heroes out of here to go contest mid lane, which is our new win condition is just stall mid lane. So the more guys we can get in there, the more bodies we can get in there, the better. So we'll play the Brawler, and then Blink Dagger out the Beastmaster because he generates 2 guys at once. Himself plus the Beast token he comes with. And we can even Traveler's Cloak our Jamoy to keep him alive and kick in for another turn. So all things are going quite well here. And we still do our 20 damage, still kill the tower, and we generate a bunch of Red Mists, and now our opponent is basically on a 2-turn clock due to the multiplying Red Mist Pillagers. They're only going to be taking about 30 on the first turn, but then after that they'll be pretty darn close to 60. So our opponent no accidents the Beastmaster, which to me means it's going to be double no accidented, which is fine, because if those had instead gone on this melee creep, our tower would have taken 9 damage, which puts it dangerously low. Remember, it doesn't matter if your tower's at 1 or your tower's at 40. As long as it's alive, but when you're trying to stall, every point matters. In this lane, we've completely given it up. Just have at it. Luckily, our opponent did not get any Town Portal scrolls to pull one of their heroes out. And so basically we've stranded them with the 2 heroes plus the creep they played plus a couple melee creeps. And notice they don't really have Ancient Pressure. They're just dealing 23 per turn, and maybe some of it gets blocked by a melee creep. So really it's even less than that. They're threatening a tower kill in 4, maybe 5 turns, and we're threatening it on lane 1 in 2 turns. So you can see why I'm perfectly happy to give up on lane 3, but my opponent is not really happy to give up on lane 1. Since our game plan is to just stall on lane 2, we're just going to put every hero in there because we're going to win on lane 1 without committing any more resources. We notice we have some card draw spells, Arcane Assault and Foresight, so we're going to and Jamoy's active, so we're just going to draw some cards and then use Arcane Assault to pull back initiative going into lane 2. But we're dealing 28 this turn, and then we're going to make 4 more Red Mist Pillagers, and then we can add the Beastmaster back in and his Beast token on the next deploy phase because our opponent doesn't have any heroes to deploy, and if that doesn't get us to 80, I think it's pretty darn close. Plus the Arcane Assault deals 2 as well, for what that's worth. I took quite a bit to figure this out to make sure that I was actually looking at mid lane to see, does Friendly Fire really do anything? But it'll end up that we have all these options because we have Ancient Pressure in lane 1, and we can play the Aghanim Sanctum now to cast both Friendly Fire and Eclipse, and then use the Arcane Assault to pull back initiative. So we have better options on doing that. That's why these initiative cards are so powerful, is that we get, you can do everything you want in a lane that your opponent has given up, and then typically that means your opponent gets initiative back. But in this case, it's not the same. Because we have that gain initiative card. And actually you could see back on lane 1 that we were dealing 47 with no creep spawning, and then we're going to get our creeps plus possibly their creeps might interact with it, but then we've got Beastmaster as well to add another 8 points with him and his Beast. This point, Friendly Fire doesn't actually kill anything on this lane, but we're really not trying to deal that 37 points. We're not even looking at their life total. We're just trying to keep our life total as high as possible. If I had a card like Enough Magic, I would definitely have cast it right away, because I don't care about casting these big Friendly Fire and Eclipses. I just want my towers to survive. It happens that I don't have it, so I'm going to have to use these and use Skywrath Mage's active to make the most of it. But like I said, if I had something like that, like enough magic, this would definitely be a time to cast it, because our tower's not taking damage, and we just want to get back to lane 1, because then we'll win. Opponent's playing some equipment because they spent a bunch of gold on it, but now Friendly Fire will kill off their 2 black heroes, and that should prompt the concession out of our opponent. We don't actually destroy the tower this turn, but coming up on lane 1, they have no heroes to deploy. They just have some random creeps. They could have hoped for some good creep RNG that they block something big and we curve into them, but our opponent sees the writing on the wall and they pack them in. So I think that game really demonstrates exactly why winning on lane 1 is more important, and why a card like Red Mist Pillagers is so strong, because they let you have that ancient pressure that your opponent cannot ignore, but my opponent chose to ignore and got punished for it. So I hope this really helped you. Make sure you check out the article in the link in the description down below. I go into these in more depth in the written form rather than just go through an example. Hope it helped, and thanks for watching.